We'll just give it a few minutes before getting started officially, but welcome back to UNBC Terrace Campus's public presentation series. As you can see, we have a complete lineup that takes us through to April. The schedule there is in front of you. Also, if you want to be reminded by email or phone call as to particular events, you can let the front desk know. Teresa or Alma will be glad to help you out. But I see a lot of familiar faces here, so I think we've got a regular cohort now of community members who take part in these talks, but do spread the word. We've got quite a variety of presentations, everything from science to politics and everything in between. And we, in many ways, kicked it off last week already with an open presentation to our nursing cohort. So lots of interest across the disciplines. It's my pleasure today to welcome Dr. Robert Patrick, who is from the University of Saskatchewan, and we managed to snag him here while visiting his daughter Roz for a few days. So we like to take advantage of these visitors to the community. So again, if you know someone who's coming to town with interesting professional experience, interesting research, let me know and we'll schedule an extraordinary talk. But this one we managed to get into the regular time period. Bob is originally a native of British Columbia, grew up in Vancouver, and went to UBC for his undergraduate degree, then did a master's at SFU, worked as a planner in, I believe, in the Seychelles, Sunshine Coast area for a while, and even in Australia. Then he went back to school to get his PhD at the University of Guelph, and he's been an associate professor and recently even program chair in the planning program at the University of Saskatchewan in Saskatoon. And he's going to talk to us about a theme we hear more and more about, which is place building, place making, building communities, helping communities evolve into what we want our neighborhoods to be. And we're on live stream, so what you say and what Bob says will be broadcast across the interweb and saved for posterity.
Great.
Take it away, Bob.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. Thank you very much for this invitation to be here today. It's a real pleasure to be in your community and to see such a great audience here. I was told there could be anywhere from 7 to 15, and it looks like we're getting close to 30 or more. So this is just wonderful. It shows that you're interested in planning and in placemaking, whatever that might be, and in sustainability. So it's wonderful just to be here, and I want to dedicate this afternoon's talk to my two grandsons, Fisher Barabash and Tully Barabash, and there's their mother sitting right there. So I'll dedicate this talk to them. So I hope it goes well. Don't be too rough on me because this is a dedication. As Phil said, I'm from the University of Saskatchewan. We have a planning program there. It's an undergrad program, similar, I guess, to the UNBC and Prince George undergrad program. It focuses mostly on urban, although there is a regional focus to it as well, and more recently an environmental focus. And most of my research is more on the environmental planning side, but I do dabble from time to time in the urban stuff as well. We're a small program with 4 core faculty, but we have about 130 graduates, 130 enrolled students in that program. So it's a very active program. Well, the talk today is really about, I've titled it Getting from Good to Great. And I don't know if that's maybe making a big presumption here, suggesting that you're not already great. You're certainly good, but I don't know the community all that well. I've only been here, I think this is my 3rd visit to Terrace, BC. And placemaking is a topic that is quite becoming quite in vogue right now in the urban planning field, about connecting to your roots, to your past, and using that as a springboard into the future. So let's get started and just see where this takes us. I want to kind of put today's talk in a framework, and this is quite a simple framework, but it's really going to, today's talk is really going to focus on 4 areas. Placemaking being kind of the coming together of diversity, of intensity, of connectivity, and of density. And it's really a blending of those 4 components that I think we need to pay more attention to when it comes to placemaking and building communities. So each of those 4 I'll be focusing on during the talk. Not sure how these images are going to show. Many of these I've captured from the internet. You certainly have a spectacular location, and that's no secret to any of you folks. But to the visitor, it's quite astounding how magnificent this terrain truly is. And I think sometimes when we have a magnificent terrain, we maybe don't think enough, and I'm not saying that's the case here, but we might not think enough about the physical makeup of our city, the built environment. We've got such a beautiful natural environment that we maybe don't pay as much attention as we could or should about the built environment. But there's certainly some tremendous features of Ferry Island and of the floodplain, which is agricultural land, which is wonderful. There's the approaches to the city over a magnificent river. And I understand there's some fish in that river. Is that true? Quinn Baravash might know that story. So you've got this natural wonder of mountains, of river, of floodplain, and then this ribbon of development, which really follows a historic corridor of rail and of road. And while that is a magnificent corridor, it poses some challenges for urban development when you're strung out on a long ribbon of growth. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So the first of our 4, diversity. Focusing on diversity. By diversity, we're really speaking of land use. How diverse is the land use? Is it mixed and blended? The built form. What do the buildings look like? Are they all similar, or are they diverse and offering different elevations, different heights, different masses, different building facades, different design work? Diversity in tenure type. Is it all single-family dwellings that are owned fee simple, or is there a good bank of rental? In a diverse community, you'll have plenty of rental. You'll have even special needs housing. You'll have affordable housing. You'll have condo-type dwellings. You'll have apartment and walk-ups. So a diverse tenure type, and diversity of activities, not just activities for young and mobile people, but also for elderly, for a mix of people in place. Land use, again, is speaking really about how the land is put to use. And what I see here is quite a broad mix of land uses. You've got plenty of industry, and you've got plenty of residential areas, plenty of commercial space. But how do those spaces react and interact between one and the other? Is it seamless, or is it are they fixed locations of, this is your industrial area, this is your commercial spaces, this is your residential space? In a diverse and I would say viable and exciting urban environment, you've got residential and commercial more blended, more mixed, so they're not as separated. You've got a transportation corridor, and that corridor has a rich history in this area, and I see it celebrated in the community. The long, elongated parkway. There's also remnants of the rail line there. There's a car that's part of the I think it's the historic, or is it model railroad group. So this celebrates your past, and not every community has that. Sometimes communities have to invent themselves and say, well, what are we? Who are we? And sometimes it can be very forced, almost like an overnight Disney community establishes itself without history or roots to its past. And those can be forced and not natural, leaning on natural conditions from the past. You've got that. You've got this rail, and I see it celebrated here, and that's fabulous. Could it be celebrated more? Could it be enhanced more? These are things to think about when it comes to place making, because you've got all of the history. You just need to think about how you want to show that and expose that to the traveling public. Housing, there's predominance here of single family. I haven't toured all the areas. As we move into an aging society, you know, there's young people moving in here, but there's also a core of population that are getting older. And aging in place is something that's important for communities. If we lose people that are aging to Smithers or to Prince George because there's more diversity there in terms of housing opportunities, condominiums or apartment living, maybe assisted living arrangements, then you lose part of your diversity in your community, and that's not good. You want to have active seniors in this community able to live. Maybe they're getting out of their single family dwelling, but they're able to move into something else that will keep them in the community, so they maintain their friends and their relationships and services that they're familiar with. They don't have to switch doctors, they don't have to switch other services by moving to another community. Well, you're not different than a lot of other places. You've got Walmart, you've got the big box. They're here to stay, they're everywhere. We love them and we hate them all at the same time. Something that I've noticed, and this again is not a picture I took, it's from the net, but I think there was a lot of thinking that went on at one point in time. These are quite mature trees. Not every community in Saskatchewan or in British Columbia have kind of that vegetated belt that runs through their city. So I think that's very positive. There's some treatment that's been given to the city in terms of sidewalk treatment and building facades in certain areas that provide some sense of character to the area. So built form is very, very important. And I put Peter Calthorpe's name up here if you're wanting to read more about built form. He's an American architect planner and has written a lot about the importance of built form to create community. Is enough done in this town, in this city? Is there enough consistency from one street to the next? These are things to think about. And is the theme anchored in your past? Is there a built design, a facade working that links to your past? Anchors that bring you back to the historic past of this community. This is another image, and this might not be the best example. I see some other examples in this area, and I'm speaking now not about Brownfield, but Grayfield. Do people know what I mean when I say Grayfield? I put the clue up here. Well, first, Greenfield is when we build on green land, so agricultural land or just undisturbed land. So it's green as in a pasture or a field or just forest. That would be Greenfield. Brownfield is another term that's quite common. Brownfield is former industrial land, so just across the street here. I understand there was a sawmill in here, and so this is often difficult land to develop, but because it could have toxic materials in the ground, and so there could be a cost associated with brownfield. Grayfield fits in the middle, and Grayfield is actually underutilized retail space. And there's a huge movement in the United States and in Canada right now to go back at the sort of 1960s, 1970s strip malls that had ample parking areas that are underutilized now because retail needs have switched. And we've got these large vacant areas. And again, this might not be the best example, but you've got large retail examples of retail space, largely parking space, but it could also be single-story commercial space that's underutilized. You know, that they may be even closed down. And these are prime areas for redevelopment. Any idea why they might be prime areas for redevelopment? Including Brownfield, but Grayfield specifically. Why might it be wise to redevelop that?
So the infrastructure's already there.
The infrastructure's there. The water's here, the overhead servicing is there, the sewer is there, roads are there.
Yeah, convenience for people. They don't have to drive everywhere to do shopping.
Sure, they're already in the core areas. And so they're wonderful areas to actually build upon. And there's a huge movement in the States right now. Many of those malls that were built in the 70s and 80s, I don't know if you remember those malls that were built outside of Nanaimo. Some of them were built and then shut down almost right away. They sucked the life out of the downtown core in the 70s, but some of those malls never really made it. And they're wonderful to redevelop into housing, for example. So imagine putting housing into a Grayfield area where you're surrounded already by urban services and the hardware is all there, the infrastructure is already there. So there could be, and Ellen Dunham Jones wrote a book called Retrofitting Suburbia, and she looks at all of these underutilized retail spaces, Grayfield, in the US that are being redeveloped and largely into housing, but also redeveloped commercial space. So there's wonderful opportunities there without spilling out onto your grain field, out onto your agricultural lands or into your floodplain areas. So this is just an example. SALA is the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC. And they do quite a bit of work in this. So, you know, this might be the existing site. Look at all the parking spaces. And then, you know, you move it in phases. Begin by redeveloping some of the existing space, but then filling in the parking space with some other buildings. Now this is very urban, but you can imagine some spaces in your core area that are underutilized. If they could be rezoned, and this is where we have to ask planners and city officials to be imaginative, and sometimes that's a big ask. But if we can ask for that and see rezonings happen where we can put people in the downtown core on these Grayfield sites, we can really start to make an interesting place. Brownfield. Brownfield also, you've got some brownfield. I just circled this one this morning. This is showing your floodplain and agricultural land reserve areas, but this black circle, some brownfield. And look where that's located, in a prime site for redevelopment, surrounded by services. So I would argue, if you're looking to provide more housing and spilling up onto the bench or somewhere else on the fringe of the city, I would ask the planners to hold back on those types of rezonings and to first look in your core areas, particularly as you've got an aging society, more and more people with hair color like this. Why not look at reimagining some of these sites for three-story walk-ups, for apartments, for condos. Maybe people are only here for 6 months and they're in Arizona for 6 months. So it gives them an option to lock a door and to take off and to make that transition without moving to Prince George or some other center in Canada. These are images of Edmonton. Edmonton's kind of the poster child right now as a city for celebrating winter. And they've got a wonderful conference coming on, if you're interested in this, in a couple weeks' time. Edmonton spent a lot of time, in some ways reinventing itself, but discovering that being a winter city is not a bad thing. It can actually be something that can be celebrated and made into a real selling feature for your city. And so we've set up, kind of cafes outside, public artwork and recreation activities right within the core of their city. I lived there for 2 years, and I could cross-country ski right through the core of the valley, right through the core of their city, and also partake in this. And we are winter cities. Canada's not very good at celebrating winter cities, and my city in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon, is having this real struggle right now. Some people have said Saskatoon's sort of a small Edmonton, but we've yet to figure out how to be a true winter city and celebrate the fact that we're northern and we're cold, but that doesn't mean we can't go outside. And so I still hear councillors saying, oh, we don't need to do bike paths in the city because we get snow in the winter. Well, most of us that cycle in Saskatoon cycle year round, and winter is a great time to cycle because it's like this. It's dry and it's cold, and so we find excuses not to celebrate some things, and I think we need to reimagine that mindset. European cities, they celebrate their winters. They have winter festivals and winter carnivals. Ottawa does this perhaps best in Canada, but Edmonton is coming along in a big way as well. So again, you're a winter city. Placemaking is going to include that component, not just a 4-month or 6-month city, but a 12-month city.
Is it possible to take the bike paths in Saskatoon and make them into cross-country ski trails? Because when we were in Finland once, it was really amazing that I think that's what they did, and people cross-country skied to work it with them.
Wow.
And I was just thinking that I've been to Saskatoon and they do have trails, and I just thought, wow, it would be neat to designate cross-country ski trails in the downtown too.
Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't been there for a couple of years, but I just thought, wow, it would be.
Yeah, so certainly not on the roads.
No,
but the trails, like the Meewasin Trail that runs along the river.
Yeah, that's where I have skied, but I just wondered if there were any other possibilities.
Yeah, people do ski along there. What they try to do though is plow the sidewalk for people that are joggers, to keep the sidewalk clear. So you wouldn't be able to ski on that per se, but you could probably ski off of that, ski parallel to the trails. Yeah, but that's a good point you raised, because this next image is, because what you're really talking about is multi-purpose. You've got a trail system, use it in both seasons, and that'd be a great example of celebrating winter, trying to use that space 12 months of the year, not just 6. In this case, this is a student project, one of my planning classes this year in the fall. They looked at, we went to a Saskatchewan small town of Melfort, and Melfort asked us to just bring forward some planning ideas that they could consider, their council and mayor and their staff could consider that would be helpful for them to do some placemaking and to reimagine their own city. And so the students came up with various ideas, and one was a space that could be a tennis or street hockey or a basketball hoop there, to winter, having this flooded and being able to use it 12 months of the year. So they came up with some of these diagrams and designs that would allow for multi-purpose activities. So that was the first phase of this, diversity. But diversity alone, on its own, is not enough. I can show you lots of communities that are diverse. They've got a big box retail on one corner and a strip mall on the other, and maybe a single family dwelling on the other corner. And getting from one activity or one land use to the other across a 6-lane arterial is really awkward, if not dangerous. And so it's not enough just to have diversity. And so we're moving on to number 2 now of that Venn diagram, and that's intensity. Intensity speaks to the feel of a place. How does it feel? Is it are the businesses concentrated? Is there plenty of social engagement? Are people coming and going for different purposes? And something that Jane Jacobs called organized chaos in her book Life and Death of Great American, or Death and Life of Great American Cities. Organized chaos is something where there's multiple activities happening. People are going in to get their shoe repaired, another store next door getting a loaf of bread, another store, maybe they live there in an apartment, in another store, they're picking up children from a daycare. And so there's all these activities happening. There's multiple people on the street. Typically, crime is extremely low in those areas because there's eyes on the street. But they're also just fun places because there's an energy. And that's what I'm speaking about when I say intensity. It's the feel. A street that's vacant and you're the only one on it, I don't know about you, but I don't feel very safe in those environments, whether it's day or night. When it's just you on that street, on that sidewalk, it's, and if you even don't feel unsafe, you're probably not very motivated, or you don't feel good about that environment. But where there's multiple people and multiple exchanges, we feel intensity. Well, there's that town of Melfort in Saskatchewan. This would be about 2 hours north and
Northeast.
east. Thank you. Someone from Melfort? Northeast. Northeast of Saskatoon. Great farmland, fairly wealthy area in terms of the folks that farm up in that area right now, at least. There's a diamond mine was proposed nearby. I don't think there's potash near there, but good farmland. Similar to this city in the sense that the railroad runs right through it. But here is a street, and this is what the city brought the students up, and they said, here it is, here's your palette. What can we do with this? And does it look very intense to you? Are there social spaces there that have been created for the purpose of motivating this thing, organized chaos? And the students kind of looked at this on a September afternoon. It was about, 95 degrees. Not too much shade there, is there? Unless you're able to stand under the lamppost and follow the sun, or the solar system. There was no shade. There were very few people. The people that were on the street were in cars. And they found that very odd. And we said, well, what's wrong with this picture? And we pretty much came up with the notion that, in planning and in street design, that street is far too wide for the height of those buildings. That street's about right for somewhere like Manhattan in terms of the angle, sort of that 4 or 5 to 1 street width to building height. And it's just oversized. And again, the engineers, and I apologize if there are any engineers in here, but the engineers for the city, and we heard this from the community manager, said they love these streets this wide because they can pile snow down the middle. And so they actually make the street looks better in winter because the driving space is reduced. But they like the wide street so they can pile snow there. Well, that's not really a good enough excuse to have such a wide street because it makes for a very inhospitable landscape. And I can show you what happens in other parts of the world. Look at these streets by comparison. These are examples from the UK that I just took off the internet. A street can be closed 1 or 2 days a week and allow people to walk that street. But look at the width of that street, and it functions. I mean, you can drive on the street. Not only can you drive on it, you can park on it. And the same with this street. I'm not too sure what the squiggly white line is about. Maybe someone had too many pints at lunch before they went painting the line. But we don't need to do this sort of thing in North America, but we're fixated on it. And if you trace the width of roads in North America, many of them are 66 feet. And if you trace 66 feet, 66 feet is one surveyor's chain, and if you trace the history of the surveyor's chain, you can take that right back to Roman times. And so these roads were built that wide because legions of armies marched on them, and they had horses and chariots and everything else, and they needed that width so they could make, you know, a turn as they were going to a curve. Well, we're past that time, and we should be able to do things without so much road space. And so the students took this on as a project to see what they could do to soften that and to make it more intense as more raising the intensity of that space. And some of the things they thought of, sort of the sidewalk bulges. And I see you've got some of these in certain key areas of the downtown, and that's showing, I think, very progressive thinking. The students also thought on that wide boulevard they could plant some prairie grasses. Always nice to stick with native growth, native plants. Maybe benches, so you've created a third space. You could say to someone, I'll meet you at such and such corner, and you sit and have your lunch there. Now this isn't a freeway. I don't think we want these in the middle of Highway 16, but we could use these in city streets. So we have areas where we can meet and we can greet, and we've got well-marked crosswalks. They also provided this sort of sidewalk treatment where people were more welcome to be on that streetscape.
Has a lot of that sort of treatment downtown.
Have they? Yeah.
Lots of that.
Yeah. And so do you generally feel
Oh, much more welcome.
much more welcoming? Yeah, yeah. And it just raises the intensity. It draws people out. And when you draw people into that urban environment, you create social engagement and a sense of
What they also do is diagonal park,
Mhm.
so that it's easy to get in and out of the
Yeah.
town site. Parallel is difficult in
Exactly.
kind of spaces like that. So-
Good point. I wasn't gonna raise that, but diagonal parking, and if you look at the old historic photos, I think there's even one that I've captured from this city. We actually did diagonal parking, and for some reason we got away from it. I'm not exactly sure why. So here's another treatment that the students of the class did, and these were undergraduate students, and this is Photoshop, so they're able to bring in people and benches, and they widened the sidewalk. But notice out here at the core, this is where they would pile snow, I guess, in the winter. But this is just massive area of road space in a small, relatively small prairie town. So they put that medium strip in there. Some of the other details, you probably noticed that the lamp standards are changed. And here is the edge of sidewalk. So this is all walking space, but this different style of treatment here is to give sort of a effective boardwalk. And it also defines the edge of the sidewalk where the road edge begins. So again, creating these spaces to bring out some intensity in your core area. And the students also were really keen on having these multi-use areas. So a bit of nice skating area in the evening, and in winter and in summer, a splash park. So again, pulling people to your core. And then third spaces. Intensity is all about creating these spaces. So you've probably have you heard that term, third spaces? A first space is where you live, your home. So it's very private space. Second space is where you work. It's more shared, but it's still very much a place that's only for those that share that work environment. Third places are the places that planners love to talk about, because that's where you get social engagement. And so that's the coffee shop, assuming you're not working there, but that's the coffee shop. That's the place where you're just out on the street and sidewalk environments where you can watch people, where you can engage with other people, you can meet people. And the third of our four themes is connectivity. Connectivity. So connectivity is connecting with art and culture and our historic roots, but it's also physical connectivity, how we get from one part of town to the other. And I think this is where Terrace is a little bit challenged, but challenges also bring opportunities because of the rail crossings. And there are only certain areas where you actually have those physical spaces that bring connectivity between, is it north and south side of town. But Melfort, Saskatchewan, and many Canadian communities, because many of our cities and towns in this country were founded by the railway, so it's not uncommon to have a rail running through a city in this country. Vancouver had that problem as well. So you've got some wonderful culture and art connections, the farmers market, the linear parkway, some other cultural, historical buildings that are in place here, and places to celebrate. Is it coherent? Is it enough? Could you be doing more? I think the answer probably is yes. But prioritizing and deciding where to put these things is important. So connectivity helps us to find our sense of place, our sense of belonging. When I arrive here, do I know what I've arrived at? And I know it from Quinn and Rosalind. They talk about the river and the mountains and the places they hike and climb. And so I've got a mental image of that when I arrive here. But think of the person that doesn't have that sort of pre-treatment, and someone that just arrives. What is their first sort of message? What is it that they're understanding about this place called Terrace? Is it coherent? Is it clear? And some cities do this better than others. So we can have marked gateways into a town, into a core, commercial core, and these can be place-making reminders, cultural connections, and they speak out to who we actually are. So when I look at Terrace and I approach that wonderful, the wonderful bridge crossing here, is there an opportunity there to celebrate? I don't mean a billboard, but is there some form of urban art? Is there some sort of facility? Is there some sort of signage or message that conveys strongly? Now the banners do that well on the bridge, I must admit, but are there other features that could be drawn out that would help remind the visitor what they've arrived at? And we know we're close to McDonald's wherever we are in the world now. They've done a really good job of that. They were able to brand themselves, when was it, in the 60s? So you can now be in Moscow or at Disneyland in Florida and know where you are if you're looking for McDonald's. So we know branding can be effective. I think this is a wonderful piece of branding, and I think that's, these are wonderful connections to have that linear parkway. The thing about the linear parkway, it tends to spread people, and that's good for recreation. I know people jog it and walk it, and I see people walking it, and that's wonderful. It doesn't have the effect really of congregating people that I've seen, unless there's places along the way where people meet up, but I think it's more of a linear stretch. I'm not a big fan of linear parks and subdivisions for that reason, that they don't pull people together, they tend to separate people. This isn't a subdivision, and I think it was brilliant to do this, but are there additional opportunities to help pull people together? An interpretive center, maybe. Maybe it's around sockeye salmon. When I go on to or steelhead salmon, when I go onto the website of this city, I sure see a lot of people holding fish. So there seems to be some connection to fish. Fish and mountains. I thought of one too this morning, steelhead and steel, like the railway steel. So maybe you could be the steel, a double meaning of steel. But some form of branding. And we look at some streetscapes, we don't know where we are. The community I use this sort of the antichrist of lack of placemaking is Kelowna. I think that Harvey Road, that highway running through, they did a terrible job there. and you could be anywhere USA and not have any connection of where you are. And I'm not saying you're at that point, but there at some point it would be nice to see some form of branding to bring people together. Now, and to identify your place today with your historic past. Now, what they did in Melfort, this is what the students did. Melfort, this is an important intersection in Melfort. If you drove right by down this highway, you'd miss the entire town because the town is off the highway. It's up Main Street. So the students thought, well, this has to be somehow, and there's vacant industrial land here. The rail tracks are here, so there's empty rail yards in here, and it's not very attractive. So the students said, well, we need to first green it up. We need to put a banner. This is actually a steel fabricated, they called it just Melfort in 1904, 2014. And so this entryway is sort of a gateway. And it creates a gateway into the town, so you know, wow, that's interesting. Melfort's that way. Maybe I'll turn here and head up. And then, of course, the grain elevators, which were dominant on that landscape, there's only a few left today. The students sketched some of that, and then did this rendition and there used to be actually on this, right on this location, about 3 or 4 grain elevators. So they did sort of this industrial art, these smaller grain elevators. I joked that it looked like Darth Vader here, but they were really, these are the 4 grain elevators that once occupied that space. And of course, prairie grasses and the median strip and the light treatment, crosswalk treatment, to make it welcoming and to identify the city. Well, we are a grain area. We have a rich grain history and railroad history, and that can be captured all within that intersection. Wayfinding is another important a term I wasn't very familiar with, but the students introduced me to this. This is where you're somewhere in Terrace, and like I was yesterday, a little bit lost trying to find a store in town, where you've got messages on the street about how far it is to a store, or to an important crossing, or to an intersection, or to a historic site, or to a coffee bar, or to the public library, or even the one of the recreation facilities. And so these can be done very attractively on sort of these wayfinding signs, directional signs really, with a map. And you can even get real fancy and have a handheld where you can have barcodes and find out, you know, where you are and where it is you're trying to get to. The students were very keen on bringing forward these what they call blade signs. So these are signs that stick out from the building. So imagine you're 2 blocks down or 1 block down, and you're looking for a store, and you can actually see the sign coming off the building. And interestingly, Melfort, Saskatchewan, when they went to the historic, the museum, and they looked at the old streetscape photos from Melfort in the 1910s, and all of the buildings had blade signage. And now you see, you know, Home Hardware, or it's just written on the front. So it's written on the front, so as you're driving by at 90 miles an hour, you get a quick glance of it out the side of from your view. But if we're talking about inner city streets where we're not passing by quickly, blade signs can be very effective in helping people find their way. So that's wayfinding. Pedestrian connectivity. This was sort of the before. And sidewalk crossings in Saskatchewan are not very well marked. I think in part because, well, maybe it's the snow and maybe it's the ice and the plows marking the streets up, but they seem to not do a lot in terms of marking their crosswalks and making these spaces friendly to the public. And that's even the case in Saskatoon. But in this case, the students really worked at dropping markers on the street, providing greater areas where pedestrian crossings were friendlier, these bump outs for sidewalk, to make it more of a pedestrian-friendly place. And something that Jan Gehl called the 5-mile-an-hour city. Jan Gehl from Copenhagen is where he's done a lot of his work as a planner and architect, and he talks about the 5-mile city. And the 5-mile city is thinking about a city where you are at walking pace and your experience of that city at walking pace. And the North American city was really built around a 50-mile-an-hour. The cities were built around cars. And so if we get rid of that mentality and think about our downtown core areas as being 5-mile-an-hour environments, then we will be putting more emphasis on bump outs, on crosswalks, on properly timed crosswalks, and other street treatment in order to make the public and the pedestrian feel more comfortable. Now, again, as we're an aging community, as we're an aging society, we're going to have more and more people that are with walkers or with wheelchairs. So we need to be thinking about this now, not in 10 years from now, and making these places accessible for active seniors and people for active transportation, which means active as in physically active, walking, jogging, and cycling. So we can go from this, which is extremely unfriendly, to something like this without a lot of infrastructure or dollar investment, but it takes a consciousness to that. So here was I was talking about, how we tend to do signs now. I wasn't picking on Home Hardware, just that this is in Melfort. But again, going to blade signage and a different sidewalk treatment, a wider sidewalk. They were actually replacing some of their sidewalks, and they were just pouring concrete. They had no cutouts for trees. And again, this left hand, right hand, the engineering department were doing all the concrete work, and they said, this is how we're doing it, and this is the only way we're doing it. It's the way we've always done it. And the community manager that was giving us the tour was saying, if they could only leave a cutout for a tree, we could plant something there. Now we're gonna have to come back and cut all the concrete. And so within a municipal government, you have people working at cross purposes quite often, and that can be frustrating. Not suggesting that happens here, of course. This was another example of a left turn treatment for a street. So it's about scale, it's about shared road space, and about pedestrian space. So we can go from thinking about wide boulevards for just cars to incorporating the public. And these are friendlier places and more connectivity. So I'll speed along here. These are a couple of images from Smart Choices Edmonton. Connectivity, I like to think of part of connectivity is going back to street design. And 100 years ago, we had in our older cities, older neighborhoods today, what makes them very pleasant places and efficient places is that they were built on a grid. And the grid allows for back alleys for one. It allows for streets that you can provide better pedestrian mobility. 2 blocks south and 1 block left is the bus stop. To an arrangement today that is more likely, started about the 1980s, to this type of a living arrangement, where we've lost the back alley, we've lost that grid where we could walk on an angular tangents, to one where we've got curved streets, and we get into these neighborhoods, and the only way out is the way we came in. And the example I've given, this is in Edmonton. The bus stop is just in here. And if you lived here in this castle, The distance is probably under that 5-minute walk, which is kind of the magic number for people that will gravitate toward a bus service. 5 to 10-minute walk. It's easily under that, except that there's all this real estate in the way. So the only way out of your castle, and that's probably the same case here, is to backtrack out and find your way through all the curvilinear streets to a connecting street that'll bring you here. And of course, as the crow flies, it's nothing, but the actual walking distance is horrific. And so you hop in your car like everyone else and you drive to your destination. This is something we've got to stop doing. And we have to get back to the grid. Now, as I looked at an air photo of this city, I could see exactly the developments that were grid-like, and I could see that it was the older part of the city. And as we moved to the fringe of the city, the newer subdivisions, I saw some of this. And you can pick it out on every Canadian city, every North American city. And it started around 1980. Yes, sir?
Well, it seems to me that the one on the left is a lot more comfortable if you could, where all those back fence lines are on, if you could put small alleys in there or small pedestrian lines. Then pathways, that'd be lovely.
And they've done that. And they have done that. They recognize that these fixed fences were not facilitating pedestrian movement through these areas. So I think around the 90s they got thinking we could put some access points through there, but then neighbors that back onto them don't like them because kids hang out there and fear of vandalism or who's walking through my back of my property. There's no sidewalks here in this example. This is just curb and just an open sidewalk, curb and gutter. So they weren't really designed for pedestrian movement. They were designed solely for vehicle movement. And when we go back to the alley, where I live in Saskatoon, we've got a back alley, and the city of Saskatoon has just brought in Laneway Housing. So garage space can now be converted into dwelling. It'd be owned by the principal home, so it would be a granny suite, or it could be for kids. It could be a rental or for students. So we can actually take this type of neighborhood and double the density without changing the look of that or the feel of that neighborhood. This could very easily be a single-family dwelling, what was once a garage. Now they do have to provide off-street parking for 1 vehicle for this and 2 for this. So that's still possible depending on the site, but you've got servicing, alleyway servicing for recycling and for garbage collection, and you've got the sidewalk. So it's sort of back to the future. Again, facilitating connectivity. I firmly believe we need to stop doing this. This doesn't build community, and we do need single-family dwellings. People still very much need that type of arrangement, but we need to stop, maybe not doing this, but we need to stop doing only this. Because doing only this consumes so much land that we will quickly run out of land and start building on land that shouldn't be built on in the first place, and give up on these gray fields and brownfield areas that are right core to our communities. I'll just speed up a little because I think we're getting close to the hour. This is very much an urban image, but I show this more out of interest. This shows the relationship between density, which is urban density, inhabitants per hectare. So here's Hong Kong, very high density. And this is showing energy in gigajoules per capita per year. So this is the amount of energy you're using, transportation energy. So think of it as gasoline consumption. This is transportation energy consumption. This is density. And it's interesting only that the US cities tend to cluster in this color. It's kind of a, is that green to you, or a olive? They tend to cluster in here. And then you've got a couple of Australian countries in this color, Canada, I think, is the only, Toronto's the only Canadian city on here. And then you got a lot of European cities clustering in this area. And not sure why Moscow's there. We know why Hong Kong's out there, very high density. People typically move around by bus or rapid transit in that city. So it shows this relationship, and it's quite a fairly smooth curve, and everything's fit to that curve. So we know that we can move, we can lower our energy consumption if we arrange ourselves in a more dense environment. Now, I'm not suggesting Le Corbusier towers in the city at all, but if we can start to think about living closer to core areas, we can reduce energy consumption, and then that turns into greenhouse gas and climate change and public safety and connectivity as well. So there are many benefits to this type of living arrangement. I'll skip over this. This is just showing different densities. Low density is your single family dwellings, one house on a quarter acre or one house on half an acre. That's a lifestyle choice, and that's lovely. If we all lived like that, we would quickly run out of land. But more importantly, we would have not very interesting landscape. I think we need to have a diversity of land use types. We need to have, for different types of our lives, we don't want to be on half an acre or an acre of land. As we get older, we might want less land. So, urban features in a suburban development. I'm suggesting here today less of this. I'll say less of this. I'm not going to say none of this, but less of this and more of this, mixing this in and bringing out the grid. So this is a new subdivision in Saskatoon called Evergreen. They're doing some single family dwellings. They do have some curvilinear lots like in this area, but they're trying to infuse duplex arrangements, apartments and condos. This building actually has a back alley. This is on the grid area, and in the back alley there's a second dwelling. So they allowed 2 dwellings on a parcel that's 33 feet wide to, again, up the density without changing the look or feel of the neighborhood. So we're beginning to see this in cities, and I think it's a very positive thing. I'll probably skip over this, other than to just mention well, I will mention this one. When we're on the grid, we see that within that 400-meter walk to the bus stop, we have 43% of the catchment covered. So this is the same radius over here, just 25% of catchment. 25% of the people in that area live within 400 meters of the bus stop. So 25% of the people can walk in 5 minutes or less. Here, 43%. So it's proof that with a grid arrangement, we have greater access to public transit. What are we doing? Well, here's a flight over Edmonton, and we're still doing this sort of thing in a big way. And while we're learning the downside of this, we're not fully making these changes. And I think part of the problem is our zoning bylaws and our urban servicing bylaws and our subdivision standard bylaws still prescribe this. The banks understand this model. They will loan money because it's worked before. It works in Ottawa, it works in Toronto, it works in Montreal, it works in Saskatoon. It'll work in Edmonton, it'll work in Terrace. And so we're in a type of development pattern that everybody feels comfortable not upsetting the cart. And I agree with Larry Beasley, former planning director for the city of Vancouver, when he says what we need to do is gather up all the zoning bylaws, all the subdivision development bylaws, all the engineering guidelines, pile them up in the city square, and have a great bonfire. And if we could get rid of all this stuff that requires this, it doesn't recommend it, it actually requires it. And we like to blame the developers. It's not their fault. They're just following what they're being told they must do. So it's everyone. And we could have a great bonfire, and then we could just start over again. And we could think from the core area of our communities what we want our communities to look like. So when we've lost the grid, we've lost sidewalks, we've lost pedestrian friendliness, we've lost public transit, we've lost our sense of neighborhood. How are we for time?
Should probably wrap it up.
Wrap it up? Okay. This was just more case examples. Maybe just the images would be more important here. Different ways of arranging ourselves. I'm suggesting the grid is much more effective. Randall Arendt is a urban designer, and he said, you know, you can carve everything up into 5-acre lots, or you can cluster. So you can even have clustering in a rural environment and save in servicing, build social capital, have greater connectivity between people. So which direction to follow? This is my sort of metaphor. This is as artistic as I get. Which way do you want to go? And I'm suggesting whatever way you go, think of these four in an integrated way, not separately, but integrated. Diversity, intensity, connectivity, and density. And so my final thoughts would be placemaking will require attention to future seeking. Who are we? And a method of doing that is backcasting. And I know there's a lot of fishing people here. And so when we like to forecast, we like to think, well, we're growing at this in such a rate. Therefore, we need so many more subdivisions, or we need so much more industry or commercial space. But if we backcast, we actually think about where we want to be 50, 100 years from now. So we put ourselves there, way out in the future. And then we backcast, thinking, what do we have to do now to get to that point? And it's a different way of thinking, and I mentioned this to city planners, and they look at me like I'm crazy, but I think it would be an effective way to build our communities. We need to think about branding ourselves. I think there's a lot of great branding you could do here, whether it's interpretive center, whether it's around fish, whether it's around the railroad, or all of that. Branding based on your past. You don't have to become Disneyland North. You've got a huge and rich past here. Integrated thinking, not silo thinking. Protect your green belt and floodplain at all costs. That's critical for so many reasons. They're not called floodplains for nothing. And that's a wonderful resource you have there. The brown and gray field opportunity abounds here, and there's huge opportunities for redevelopment on those sites. Densify, intensify your downtown with mixed housing types. If you could get more people living downtown, everything would make more sense. The businesses would make more sense, they'd become more viable. You'd have all of these informal, organized chaos, social exchanges, and it would just feel healthier, a place you would want to be going to. And a walkable downtown, traffic calming, slowing traffic through your downtown. And there's many ways of achieving that. Painted crosswalks are a good way to start. So I think that's pretty much on time. Thank you very much.
If anyone has to leave, don't feel inhibited from doing so, but I'm sure Bob can
Sure.
answer some questions.
Yeah,
We
there's
do
time-
have the room for
plenty of time for
the next
questions.
period as well.
Yes, sir.
One of the questions I have about having a denser living arrangement is what you do about noise. Noise pollution is a really serious issue in a lot of places.
What kind of noise?
Oh, everything from, well, like here we've got the trains, but,
Yeah.
you know, just general living noise, traffic noise, chainsaws. I mean, I often joke about Sundays here being Possum Lake, you know, because you've always got lawnmowers and you name it, everything's going all the time. So, you know, you start doubling or tripling the density.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know, people make noise when they live.
Yeah.
How do you put limits on that?
Well, it could be that when you're living closer to the downtown, you would have some sensitivity around the Saturday morning chainsaw, because there could be a daycare downstairs, or there could be a school across the street. So living in more of an urban setting might itself help, it might self-regulate that way. The traffic, you do have to slow traffic. I mean, that is an issue. And the best locations will be ones where traffic can be calmed or rerouted. And possibly some streets even closed to certain days of the week to traffic. And having the option of like your farmer's market, of having temporary closures. So I think the noise, I mean, trains are funny. I hear the train, my wife loves the sound of a train. I enjoy it. I don't know if I'd want to be backed up against the rail line. That might be, and if it's a rail that's running, 3 times a day, that might be a little much.
We're talking about once an hour.
Once an hour, yeah. I don't think the noise would be an issue. I think it would probably self-regulate itself.
I was just gonna say, speaking to the train, we lived in Vancouver, right next to a train track, and as you do, somehow you accommodate it after a while, you stop hearing it, and you certainly did, and they were running, there was North Delta running, day and night, and after a while, I think we did notice it more first than that. I also think buildings today are much more soundproof than were in the past, so I think buildings would accommodate better windows and
Sure.
and insulation and stuff.
Great.
And traffic is also very noisy if people are just driving through places.
Okay, so question around noise. Yeah.
As you probably know, Terrace is gonna be looking at like camps outside of town, a lot of short-term, huge growth in population. Looking at all this, what kind of advice could you give Terrace to handle that extra, all the extra people for the short term?
So these are temporary
Temporary work camps for LNG, for.
on the fringe of the city.
Yeah.
Mm. Well,
Is there anything, a priority, prioritizing certain things?
temporary housing. Well, I mean, would it be better to have those people living in the city?
I'm also thinking of services, when
Mhm.
people come in, you're gonna have a lot more traffic.
Mm-hmm.
You maybe want to attract some of these people to move here?
Yeah, that might be, if you could make it so that they could have even temporary housing, but within the city. So these would be perhaps condos or apartment type, temporary, a type of tenure that would be maybe just rental. And they could be living now in the city as opposed to on the fringe of it.
And then look at diversification later on to be able to maybe convert them to something else.
Or they become permanent workers possibly. Mm-hmm. So if there's a large amount of people living on the fringe of the city, it might be an idea to see how you could develop a community within the city that would be specific for those folks. That could be one option. And then they're feeling more a part of the city is feeling that they're more a part of the community. There's less driving in and out of the city. That could be, yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
Because we have the bench, it makes it difficult as you're getting onto a bike a lot. You have to be in the mood.
Yeah.
And so is there a secret to make that easier? Do you need like a huge expansive park and, maybe zigzag back and forth to make it easier to make that trip downtown and back up?
By bicycle?
By bike.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the question is about bicycle access on some of these steeper slopes. That's an option, is to grade. Did they do that, something like that where did I see that? Was it in Kitimat, where they kind of use that slope, the trail kind of traverses a slope?
No, not so much.
Not so much.
They got that one up right up, as you go up the hill, down from downtown. There's a path that sort of winds up that.
Oh, okay.
parkway.
Footpath, yeah.
It's a footpath, yeah, it widens so that.
Maybe a chairlift, and you could put your bike on the chairlift.
No, but they have a great option that you can attach a little, motor on regular bikes. You don't have to buy an electric bike. You can actually buy an attachment that fits to certain bikes, and you can either bike normally or you can engage it, when you need it. I mean, I would encourage you to Google it and look online, because I think they're becoming quite popular in Europe, and you can get them here as well.
Pedal an assist.
It's just a regular bike, and
Mhm.
you attach, I mean, they're fairly pricey, I think, but it's a good option for biking.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sure. Ross?
You talked a lot about residential and commercial, the mixing of those two,
Mhm.
and I'm wondering that we have a lot of industrial activity in our town, and I'm wondering where that would fit in.
Depending on the industry, I'm not that familiar with industry that's been blended with residential. If it was more manufacturing, it might be possible, but processing is gonna be tricky.
So industry should be out of the,
It depends on the type of industry. It really depends on the type, industry is part of your heritage here, so you have to embrace it. And you've got to be sensitive to the land base that is designated as residential, as industrial. So it's a delicate walk. I think it'd be too much to say no residential. I think it could be maybe phased toward that. But to blend processing and residential might be not impossible, might be possible, but it would take a lot of design work.
so like this lot here
Mhm.
is for sale, it's for sale as industrial
Mhm.
right now, it's an industrial
Yep.
zoning, so would it be more beneficial to zone that in terms of land use planning to rezone that as residential and commercial,
It
being so close to the downtown?
Yeah, I mean, the services are here, the town has grown around that space. It would be a logical area to have that convert now to residential, or residential, commercial, maybe a small component or a smaller component of industrial.
Light industrial.
Light industrial, a light industrial can work, some warehousing. There could even be some manufacturing in there, perhaps some wood products that could blend well. I mean, there's brew houses and there's pubs, and some of this can be very interesting and culturally it fits nicely. So to just say go, I'd want to see what industry you could attract that would be sympathetic to. Obviously, a pulp mill isn't going to work. Another large sawmill might not work, but there could be some value-added timber or woodworking that could fit very nicely with residential that would complement your history and where you want to go in the future. It's just finding that balance. And this is where you get into northern community planning, and it's not like planning in the south. So there's some finesse that would have to happen there.
There is a city plan, for the area. They talk about it, I think you could get online. We've had several meetings about it, and sort of what you're talking about
Mhm.
is part of the plan, so.
There may be some assembly of log homes. That might not be a noisy enterprise. It something like that might work. Maybe some cabinetry work might not be noisy. I mean, planers are noisy, but there might be a way of muffling some of that sound. Yeah.
Is any city that you're aware of had an easy time dealing with the railroad in terms of splitting the access across the line? I've lived in Lethbridge and I've lived in Terrace, and it's always difficult to
Mhm.
cross over. Is there any city that stands out as having handled that very well, do you think?
It's a good question. It's very specific. I'm just thinking of cities where I've lived. I mean, Canadian cities all have railroads running through them. Guelph is a city that grew around the railroad, and yet when I'm there, I don't feel like the city is split, north, south, east, west. Certainly Melfort is split. They're looking at dealing with the railway grounds in Saskatoon. There's a massive area of industrial railroad that they would love. The city has plans to do a downtown north there, so they're gonna build residential on that land. But the rail line running through the city will remain. It won't be relocated. What they're planning to do is instead of like a single crossing, they're planning to do this massive, it's almost blocks long, kind of almost like a canopy over the rail. So you'll be able to walk over it, and almost like a park that has this mound, and it'll be where you could just be on top of the rail and not know it. That's pretty innovative idea.
Wildlife crossings and parks.
Mm-hmm.
Open highways.
Yeah. That dome over the rail. So Saskatoon's they're doing that. They're going ahead with that plan. I think cities come of age and they work it out. They provide more crossings. In this case, the road's not going to go away. So maybe the answer here is more crossings, more areas where there are crossings. That might be the solution for this city. Because how many are there? There are two that I'm aware of. Three.
One's an overpass.
One, yeah, okay.
I think there was a question over here.
Could be more pedestrian crossings though, just not cars, but just people crossings. And have them, celebrating to some degree the history of the rail. So it's not just a utilitarian crossing, but it's got some urban art attached to it.
That was actually precisely my question.
Okay.
Because that's a big one for downtown businesses.
Mhm.
That they said since the co-op and the medical center moved away, then they've just been struggling still. And they're just saying we need that traffic from the south side, the walking traffic, so that they could remain parked on that other side. Because we have an issue with downtown parking all the time. So
Mhm.
if they could just stay parked on the south side and walk over,
Yeah.
then, and that's a beautiful idea of the wildlife thing, because we don't have a lot of scenic areas here for like buildings. So like whenever we kind of have a spot, there's always like industrial something or commercial spot sitting there. So we don't have a nice restaurant view, of the river or something like that. So if we did actually that,
Could actually
that would,
put
you could have a
stores
nice
up
park
there.
over top, and wouldn't that be lovely?
Could you do it,
Yeah.
and even those large galvanized culverts, giant culverts, but maybe some of those along the way, but a way that wouldn't, I think you want to bring people to the rail line, and the road crossings, for me, don't really work. Like, I don't really feel like I want to walk across those car crossings, the overpass or the level crossing. But if it was pedestrian only, and you were able to get from one side of town to the other in key locations, start with one and see how it works, but have a park at both ends of it, so that it's a place that'll congregate people. And maybe there's some other attraction that's at that location, but it brings people to the track as opposed to trying to pretend the track isn't there and how to avoid the track, because that's not going to happen. Quinn?
I just have a question about sort of the vision for this area.
Mm-hmm.
When we first moved up here, we didn't move up here because the city of Terrace was necessarily the place where we wanted to live, but the surrounding area is what drew us in. And when I think about towns that people are probably drawn to, where there's a combination of both, immediately Tofino pops up. That's a very nice area to live geographically, but also what they've done with their town. Mind you, it's small, but they have certain bylaws in place where like there's no franchises, so you don't have those big box stores. you have the infrastructure where it's all kind of following the same sort of theme. And another town, obviously Whistler, they got the draw of the mountain sports. Nelson, there's all these towns where they seem to have established some sort of theme in the design for their vision, and they have the extra draw for their surrounding area.
Yeah.
So I don't see that in Terrace. I see sort of a mishmash of all kinds of, lots of box stores, which aesthetically they're not, I don't know, they don't really boast vibrance and or character. So how, if I was to, sit on a committee that was to establish some sort of a vision for this community, it would be one where there was more energy and emphasis put into making the town more vibrant by employing some of the tools that you just shared with us today. Drawing traffic into the core, absolutely huge, not only for local store owners and retail outlets, but for sort of the energy that comes with that as well.
Yeah.
Then I look at, and I know this is an area of contention, but you consider massive like chains like Walmart. And I don't know what sort of reports there have been out there that illustrate how they can just absolutely destroy small business opportunities by taking all of those potential dollars away from probably locally owned store owners, pumping them into a massive franchise, taking all those dollars. Sure, they employ a few people for and provide some services for low costs, but is there anything out there that suggests that those big box stores take away from the community and opportunities that would otherwise go to locally owned store owners? I know on Sunshine Coast where we grew up, it's just one store opens, the next week it closes because there's no.
Well, the community, at the beginning the communities that you mentioned, like was it Whistler and Tofino? I mean, they're all economically doing very, very well.
Yeah.
So there's a connection with good land use planning and placemaking and economy. And that's why I said sustainability in the title. It's not just environmental sustainability, but it's long-term economic viability, economic sustainability. So there's that connection to make. West Vancouver, if I can use that example, because I grew up in Vancouver, they pushed back big box until big box softened a little. And the big box said, okay, we won't do our 6,500 square foot, we'll just do a 2,500 square foot, but we still want to be in your neighborhood. And the community took charge and said, okay, we'll agree to the smaller one, we don't want the bigger one. So they held out and they drew the line on the map, and they said, we'll accept you if you come under these conditions. But is there research? There probably is research. I'm not aware of it on the impact of big box and what it does to smaller stores. There probably is some information around that, but I think what's more important is that communities decide themselves what they want in terms of big box, because there's evidence that shows that you can downsize those establishments and have some impact. But the fact is it's there, and they're there in all these communities. They provide some economic benefit, but that's an economic question. I can't really answer that.
Perhaps that's a good place to stop. Please join me in thanking Bob for having the courage to
Thank you.
immerse himself in community planning and growth challenges.